Hello and welcome to our Washington Times recap of the first Republican presidential primary debate of the 2024 campaign. I'm George Gerbo, joined once again by our two talented national politics reporters. We've got Seth McLaughlin and Susan Ferrechio joining us once again to break down everything that happened in Milwaukee, Wisconsin last night. It was as expected. If you wanted a show, you got a show. Not as crazy, in my opinion, of a show as we've seen in some of the past cycles and debates, but still a lot of stuff to talk about and break down from the debate. I think the biggest thing to hit on first, and it's something that the candidates hit on approximately midway through the 2 hours there, hosted by Martha McCallum and Brett Baer of Fox News. Donald Trump's absence from the debate. He has said that he was not going to participate, and he included the word debates plural in his social media post when he did so. So leave that to your imagination about whether the former president, is going to participate in any future Republican presidential debates, primary debates. I'll start with you, Seth. Does Trump miss, and he did his own version of counter programming with Tucker Carlson on social media. Does Trump miss anything by not being there and getting even a greater chance? He's the front runner right now. He is the leader in polls by a substantial margin over the rest of the field. Did he miss anything by not being there in Milwaukee last night?
I mean, you can kind of go both ways with that one. I probably not, at least in the opening debate, because these are like chances for, more than anything else, the lesser known candidates sort of introduce themselves to voters, start kind of defining where the differences are going to be on issues and whatnot. So I don't know, Trump skipping out. I think if he was there, obviously he would have been the story, and that would have dominated things. But him not being there, I don't know. You heard people talking about how this was actually the undercard after the debate. That was the way they were classifying it. So, in a way, he had less to gain and more to lose, except, the storyline there. So I don't know. I really think you can go two ways with that. I would say it doesn't change his life that much. He's still going to lead in the polls. More than anything else, it sort of gives us a sense of what his competition looked like and if they can hold their own on stage with others.
Yeah, and to add to Seth's point, I think we'll know more about whether this was good or bad for Trump when we see post-debate polling. The goal of the debate for these candidates wasn't just the usual plan of survive and advance, or however they have described these debates over the years. They are so far behind Trump in the polls, and he's leading them by 30 points in most races, that they had to do more. They had to try to springboard out of these polling doldrums they're all in to show they can really compete against this runaway front runner. So we'll know whether Trump made a mistake by skipping the debate if the fact that they were allowed to commandeer the limelight away from Trump, if that gave any of them a real edge, a real way to advance. Then I think you may see Trump rethinking whether or not he should participate. Because remember, the premise of him skipping these debates is that he doesn't need to go. He's so far ahead of these guys. Well, let's see what happens if someone looks, think about the people who really dominated the spotlight, and cleverly so, the more the camera's on you, it's recognition, name recognition, face recognition. That is the beginning of a candidate's ability to penetrate, the voter, penetrate the electorate. And I'm curious to see how certain of these candidates did that were really dominating the debate last night. If we see them picking up many points following this debate, Trump may be thinking, perhaps I should step back in so I can pull the spotlight back on me and not give these people a chance to really show the voters who they are. Because let's face it, Trump's sucking the oxygen out of this whole GOP primary, has been doing so since the very beginning. I think last night's debate was really the first time he didn't do that, even though I know he was doing his Tucker interview and sending out his email blasts in response. But you had Fox News, which is watched by highly rated network, and a lot of other people tuning in as well, I'm sure, who aren't regular Fox viewers, who want to see these candidates Trump wasn't there. And there were some questions about him, but mostly it was about each of these candidates, who they are, and duking it out amongst themselves as if Trump didn't exist. So kind of showed people, here's the alternative universe. And why I think that's dangerous for President Trump is he does lead the polls by 20, 30 points, but his command of the Republican base is not really a majority. He gets in the 40s with the GOP base, but the field, which is everybody else, so if you ask all the voters who else, oftentimes is bigger than that. So it shows that voters may be looking at other candidates, say 50+%. They're just divided on who that is. Trump's campaign is well aware of this. He's got some real veterans working. They see what's going on here. So I know they're going to watch this carefully. So even though Trump said, I'm not going to participate in any of these debates, it's possible he won't. But I think we need to just keep an eye on what the polls show now that this debate is over and people got a good look at these other candidates.
George, let me piggyback on what Susan said
Absolutely.
there. I think awesome point on, like, you never get to see what the world looks like without Trump in it, right? And so last night was exactly that. And,
Yeah.
you know, who knows how that hits?
Right.
But, you know, you could see voters looking at that and going, okay, you know, we're in a world without Trump now. You know what I mean? Like, and I think Susan's right. Like, how far that digs in with the electorate, you know, we'll check those later polls and whatnot. And I think the other thing that is really important is that debate really wasn't for us. You know, that's for voters in Iowa and New Hampshire. It's a small pool of voters who they're trying to connect with.
Right.
And they were able to do so without Trump around. And I, you know, so I guess I got to change my answer based on what Susan said because it was much wiser.
No, you're right as well. Because believe me, that mine's just a best case scenario for all these other candidates. I mean, we may see polling next week that everything is exactly the same because Trump has had a remarkably durable hold on the Republican candidate. You know, I know Seth and I have been out there talking to voters, and it's a powerful and very serious connection with the voters that not much can break apart. Even all these, you know, all his legal troubles, you could pitch him in any way to the voters, but they will defend him to the end. They love him. So the base is really solidly behind him. So my question is, it's all these other voters that we see in the polls who aren't behind him. Who are these non-42%? Who are these voters? Who are they looking at? Can they get behind one person? People always made the argument, oh, well, all these other candidates shouldn't get in the race. It should just be Trump and then Ron DeSantis. Then he will coalesce all these other voters. I don't even know if that's true because people don't necessarily like him for a variety of reasons. And, you know, it's kind of an unusual situation this time. And last night's debate was kind of like Seth was saying, it's kind of the alternative universe, you know, of the world of Trump. And then this is what it would be like without him. And to me, that was exciting just to see them really duke it out on the issues that had nothing to do with Trump.
And as far as voters go, I mean, when I was in Iowa, you know, our readers who are Trump fans will let you know that they don't like what you're writing if you show them that there are voters out there that are open to alternatives. And my experience in Iowa for the fair and everything is there is a big appetite for a potential alternative. There are people who organically tell you, without even prodding the Trump question, that they would like to see an alternative. So there is a huge opportunity for someone to step into that vacuum. Now, last night was an opportunity to see if anyone can kind of start making that move. And it seems like it was a little bit of a mixed bag for everybody, but I think some people scored some points.
Yeah, and one that stands out, at least to me, out of that whole field, and kudos that it was, I guess, to the RNC, that it was, as you talk about alternate reality, 2012, the last time we had a non-Trump, Trump not being in a cycle. Obviously, it was in the 2016 cycle in 2020, but also not a stage of 12 or 14 candidates, which was just almost like a sideshow in those years past of early Republican primary. And the Democrats have done similar things too, but 8 is a nice
Yeah.
number where you got to hear people, Susan, from Martha McCallum and Brett Baer made it a point to go to Asa Hutchinson and Doug Burgum. And even if they were on the terms of speaking time, only 8 minutes compared to Mike Pence, who led all the candidates with 12 minutes speaking, it was still nice to see them involved in it as opposed to 12 people that and 3 of them you never heard a word from. They did a good job of kind of spreading the wealth on the stage, I thought.
Right. And I've moderated a debate with the Fox News hosts myself back in 2012. So I was part of the planning of how we decide who gets on the stage and whether we can fit 13 podiums versus 12 podiums, and how we can get questions in. And it's really hard to plan that and make sure everybody gets the questions. I thought last night was a bit of a free for all. So, and you could tell that it was clearly they really let the candidates, they did a lot of follow-up questions. They also let the candidates answer each other and have interactions, which I think made it a lot more interesting. However, you heard less from each of the candidates and it was a little more lopsided, as you said. So let's think about who dominated the debate. Mike Pence, as you said, Vivek Ramaswamy, who I think cleverly, he really had the camera on him the whole time. Look, if you're at 4% in Iowa or 7% in Iowa or New Hampshire, 5%, you can't just get up there and talk about your policies. You need the camera on you. So people say, who's this guy? And that they get to know him. Vivek, who's that? So he's got the camera on him the whole time. Mike Pence, same way, down in the polls. He knows he's got to get the goal of last night wasn't just to sound, competent and like you were, you know the issues and you have great policies. It's to get the camera on you. I thought the winner in that sense was Vivek and Mike Pence, as you said. Everybody knows who Mike Pence is, though. He's the former vice president. For the people known, got the camera on him. Yes, he got some boos when he was talking about climate change. He got some boos when he was, just for things he was saying about Ukraine. He also got a lot of cheers, but he kind of dominated. He was sort of in the spotlight. He was at center stage because of his polling and his donations that put him in that sort of prime location. And he made good use of it. He butted in all the time. He had the camera on him. I'm curious to see how his polling looks after this, just because the awareness level of him will go up. And I thought the loser in all of this, I'm not talking about Doug Burgum, the North Dakota governor, and I'm not talking about Tim Scott, who didn't get enough airtime for sure, or Asa Hutchinson for that matter. But I thought the loser here really was Ron DeSantis in terms of airtime, because cleverly, I think the candidates kept the spotlight off him. He's in double digits on the second tier candidates. Yes, he trails Trump by 20 plus points, but he's well ahead of a lot of these lower candidates too. So he was the guy to try to knock out in the debate if you're going to look at it as a debate sans Trump. But he was really interesting in that I almost forgot he was there some of the time. I was so enthralled by this fighting with the Christie and Vivek fighting, which I was just like, this is hilarious. The two of them going at each other where, Vivek's bringing up the Obama, handshake on the tarmac back in 2012. And Chris Christie is calling Vivek, comparing him to a GChat program. And, it was kind of snarky and funny. And the audience was really getting riled up. But then you're like, oh, wait, what about the front runner here, Ron DeSantis? And then he would not butt in. But then they call on him. He was like, let me just be above the fray here. The problem is that gave him less camera time. And I feel like in a debate where the candidates are all so badly trailing the front runner, you got to bust in more and you got to kind of dominate. And in my view, I thought the tactics of Christie, Pence, and Vivek Ramaswamy really worked to get them out front, in front of the camera. I mean, didn't you feel like you were just watching them the whole debate, Seth? I mean, it was like, and then occasionally like, oh yeah, there's DeSantis.
Yeah. You could say, unfortunately, for today's politics, people are there for the show. You know what I mean? And so you have to have that in your arsenal in order to draw people in. And it's almost, the way it works is number one, you connect with someone on a style level or a message level, and then you dig into the policy and all that stuff. And so I think in this instance, Susan's exactly right. Vivek, he basically was the pest on stage, and he was doing like hand signs, and we weren't in the room, but you could tell he was annoying everybody on stage, right? Like, who's this political outsider dude who has no experience with anything, who's like ripping us all, right?
Yeah, 20 years younger than all of them, you know, and at least 20 years younger, right? He's 38.
Right.
So, and he came in as the outsider, also as the new generation, as all these old fogies, we're tired of you. We need someone young who can build a coalition of the working class, of people of various races, all very appealing, very modern, very, you know, new generation politician.
Yeah. At the same time, though, I think if you were to say who had the most Trump-like performance in a debate, right? It's Vivek.
Yeah.
Because he played by his own rules. He was annoying people. He was saying stuff that no one else says. And so if you're just grading this on a style curve, you know, he's the one that was the most Trump-like. Now, we should get to, like, does this matter? Right? Mm-hmm. And the reality is Vivek has a massive hill to climb. But, you know, he definitely is going to enthuse hard right voters who are looking for someone who's going to, you know, smack the left in the nose. Yeah.
And he did take those positions on Ukraine, very Trumpian positions. Let's spend the money here. Let's put the effort on the border. Let's not, you know, he called it a no-win war. He always calls it that. And he
said all his rivals were bought and paid for. He said climate change was a hoax. Right. You know, like there were all kinds of things that he has dove in and separated himself, you know, rightly or wrongly, from the other people on stage.
Right. And they took a more kind of delicate approach to all that. Like, for example, I think Ron DeSantis, he's an environmental governor in Florida. You cannot be a governor in Florida unless you're an environmental governor. He will never win election again because the state relies so heavily on keeping the environment clean for so many reasons. So he can't come out there and say it's a hoax. However, does he support, you know, the green energy policies of the Biden administration? No, it's just how he puts it. Whereas Vivek will come out and just say, yeah, it's a hoax, and we need to it needs to be all in on energy and turn this economy around. He is pretty direct about his feelings, and he got booed by that, and he handles it well. I mean, the guy's a showman on stage. Yeah. It's funny. I was just talking about a comment I saw on Twitter from Megan McArdle of the Washington Post, who I thought was really funny. And she said, he's just such a great speaker, but she felt he seemed slick on stage. And I thought she characterized as perfect. I'm sure you'll agree, Seth. She was waiting for him to sell her a ShamWow. He's so good, right? And Christie was kind of, you know, picking on him for that. Why do you call him the G-chat guy? So that I thought was a very interesting exchange between the two of them, and the way he called out, you know, he said that Nikki Haley was going to end up on the boards of these big contractors and things. You know, he's calling out the part of Washington that people hate. And that doesn't get a lot of exposure. That's part of the revolving door. It's part of the awfulness of Washington, the deep state. But then he says things like Vivek's views on like cutting us off from China completely, come what may, for our economy. Also eliminating every single agency, and then no more IRS, no more Department of Education, no, just get rid of everything. Mm-hmm. Things that you think, if you were president, like, would this really happen, and how would he do it? And so he's pushing those views, and I think that will keep him out of, you know, realistic polling for himself. I don't think America is ready for that. Although people like the idea of getting rid of the Department of Education, certainly are large. That's been going around for decades, by the way, trying to get rid of the DOE. So, and then there's, you know, Christie trying to run as the guy who was a governor in a blue state. Therefore, he knew how to work with a legislature that was not Republican, and how to get things done there. So he pushed his accomplishments in that sense. DeSantis pushed his accomplishments, many more accomplishments, because he's in a red state with a red legislature. They basically, you know, had the green light. They could get his whole agenda and then some across the finish line. So he talked about that and how he could do that with the rest of America. Each of them pushed their talents and their expertise. And I thought they all did everybody did a pretty good job answering, these complicated questions about how they would handle certain things in life. I felt like Tim Scott did not talk enough or get to express his views enough. And Asa Hutchinson and Doug Burgum, who are very low in the polls, and that's probably why they didn't get a lot of airtime, just because they're just not polling. I think Tim Scott probably should have had more time talking, because his polling numbers, for example, in Iowa, are really pretty good for the second tier candidate. He's very competitive there. So, it wasn't a completely balanced debate, and it was a bit of a free for all where people like clashing with each other in that way. But you really did get a good look at the field.
Tim Scott too, like his selling point is I'm the nice guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, let's go back to what we were talking about. Like if people are there for the show, not only are they there for a show, they're there for a fight, right?
Right.
And that's not Tim Scott's, that's not his backbone right now and what he's trying to do politically.
No.
And I also feel like Tim Scott, he hasn't been on the national stage before. So he's kind of feeling out his messaging, and, you can see obvious times where he falls back into canned material. And voters,
his style is very halting, Seth, too. Like the way it's almost like he's looking for the point that he's trying to make as he's talking, while the other candidates will have that point already and they know what they're going to say.
And he'll raise his voice in such a way that it's meant to elicit emotion and get people hyped up, but it feels a little choreographed, And, the other guy that we'll talk about, I guess, if we could right now, is Mike Pence, right? Mike Pence suffers a little bit from that. But I do think Susan's correct. Like, that was a different Mike Pence last night.
Right.
Much more assertive, really trying to get into the fight. And, Pence is he doesn't lie when he says he's a classic conservative and that he's been in trenches for a long period of time. But, he originally joined Trump because he kind of gave Trump a little bit more of a mellow veneer.
Normalized, yeah.
Yeah. But when you're trying to be the number one guy again right now, I don't think that works. And Pence knows that. And he is down in the polls, and he's trying to, lean into experience, and take on others like Vivek, who he thinks basically are a joke and shouldn't be on stage, in a more aggressive fashion than we've seen.
Susan, to Seth's point, I wrote down last night, Mike Pence thinks everything is about him, which was in tangentially, when you bring up the prior administration, you could put it that way. But he was like, hey, they talked about me. Like, no, they didn't really talk about you, but he tried in that way to shine the spotlight, pull the spotlight over to himself by saying, you're talking about the previous administration. Let me defend what you're talking about and what the Trump Pence administration did. And so, yeah, to that point, it was a different Mike Pence. Same Mike Pence in terms of pro-life. We know that. He brought up his time as governor. He brought up his time in the House. He was balanced budget act, all that type of stuff. Classic Mike Pence, but then with a little bit more punch to it, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and I think, like Susan knows this, if you talk to Trump voters who appreciate what Mike Pence did, obviously most will say he did the wrong thing on January 6th, which is a whole different thing. But the problem I think they really have with Pence is they don't know that he's a quote unquote fighter, right? And that he's willing to scrap it out like Trump. And I think that's probably part of what he was trying to show last night.
I think that's exactly right. If I were to say best strategizer, Vivek was good in that he scrambled for the attention constantly, but I think Pence was a little more stealthy about that, and he did exactly what he needed to do, because at this point he's at a do or die point. He's got to show some life in the polls. This was the real opportunity to do that on the national stage. He's got to get out of like the bottom of the polling. He's got to advance a little bit. The expectations are higher for him because he's the former vice president. So he's just underperforming, and he needs to show that there are signs of life in his campaign. And I think he did a great job last night if he had just been his usual self and waited for them to call on him, say in the same manner as Ron DeSantis, who is double digits, I think that would have been a terrible mistake for him, because he just would have disappeared in that crowd. That was a crowd where you had to elbow your way in, and he did it. He did it, and it's, you're right, Seth, in that you wouldn't have expected him to do that, and he pushed his way. He was more aggressive than I thought he would be, and he also, I think, he did a good job explaining. I thought the moderators let him talk a lot more.
They gave him a lot of leeway.
Yeah. And I think they did it because he's the former vice president.
Yeah.
They think these things out at Fox when if there's a lot, even though it may have looked a little chaotic on stage, it's a very well-planned chaos. So if the vice president's talking, I mean, Brett Baer did cut him off at one point, said, look, you got to stop talking. I'm trying to ask a question.
Right.
But he also let them, like, once we got to the January 6th and the part about his role there, they shut up and they let him give a whole monologue on that. I thought that was fair. That's his sort of, that's the thing that's sort of just kind of just attached to him as a candidate. That event is such an important thing. And they gave him the opportunity to say what we've already heard him say a million times, but he said it on the national stage. And the other things he did explain well is his role as vice president. And what I thought came across really well for him last night is the idea that he, among all those candidates, is the most experienced and prepared, because he was a former governor. He was in leadership in Congress for years. He was a successful governor of Indiana, and then he was vice president, and for an administration that was very successful in accomplishing a lot of things that Republican voters tell me make them want to vote for Trump again, because they like that. So Pence getting up on the stage saying, I'm the most experienced and prepared here, I thought he made a very good case for that. So if voters are out there thinking about that and looking at the candidates, all those 50% we were just talking about at the beginning, I mean, they might look at Pence and say, you know what, he's he's a conservative, a rock solid conservative. He's got this experience, and that may give him an opportunity to edge up in the polls somewhat. And I'm not saying it's going to happen, but he certainly put himself in position to do that last night.
Yeah, he is traditional conservative, and he leans into it. And two things shine through last night on that. One, his two impassionate pleas he gave. One was on the 6-week abortion ban on the federal level.
Right.
Basically, he's trying to get pro-life conservatives in his corner. It's got to be do or die for him to win over that selection of the base if he has any chance of winning. And then the other thing he did was he gave another impassioned plea on Ukraine. And that is a major dividing line, whether or not the United States should be more involved, less involved, stay involved, And he said, we have to. And he took issue with others that said, we should redirect that money to the southern border or whatever, and said, if you don't believe the United States can do two things at the same time, basically, you're a meatball. So
right. That was an excellent point. And Nikki Haley also jumping on that. She did a great job talking about the importance of aligning ourselves with Ukraine. And I think they really showed up Vivek on that issue. And, I feel like DeSantis is in on that as well. He's walked that line more carefully than
1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Mm-hmm.
He really has. And he was really careful on his answer there, but he didn't sit around advocating for aid. He just said, we need to spend money we need to secure our own border, and kind of change the subject. But I thought Nikki Haley did a good job saying, look, Vivek, you really sound like an amateur right now when you talk about abandoning Ukraine. The problem with that whole part of the debate is the public is divided on this as well, but there are polls that show a big majority of people don't want the U.S. involved in Ukraine. But those polls depend on how you ask the question. They say involvement means a lot of things to people. We don't, the Iraq and Afghanistan war have, I think, for generations tainted America's view of involvement overseas, for sure. And the Ukraine issue now is coming up in the polls, and people are like, what is this war? Why do we care? Why do we want to even be involved in this? And so I think Vivek and DeSantis are aware of those numbers, and they're looking at those voters and saying, look, people are tired of these foreign wars. And they also know that Trump is mostly saying the same thing. Like, why are we spending all this money there and when we should be spending it at home? And is the war winnable? What kind of settlement should there be there? What does Trump say? To stop the killing,
Right.
There's not a lot of agreement in the public on this issue too. So it's hard to say who was a winner or a loser last night based on what their policies were on Ukraine. But you did get a chance to see who's on what side, and that'll give voters a little more clarity with these candidates. If Ukraine is that really top of mind for voters, probably it won't be, because people it's not in the news as much anymore. It's just kind of faded out of our picture here. So people are going to be thinking about other things: the border, abortion, the economy, domestic issues that they feel affect them, gas prices, interest rates. These are things that are just people are living with right now and struggling with. So Ukraine may not even be something that people really think that comes top of mind when they vote in these primaries.
And if that's the case, I mean, maybe we should talk about Nikki Haley for a minute, because I thought she had a strong debate performance based on when she engaged, right?
Abortion was very strong. That was the most concise way and cleanest way I've heard somebody delineate where saying, we're not going to send women to jail for having an abortion, but still we can do these things and it's still pro-life. Whereas Mike Pence is a little bit more on the side of absolutism with that.
Right.
Yeah. You got to abortion is a big issue in the primary. Okay. It's a big issue in Iowa, where 2/3 of voters who showed up at the last competitive GOP primary in 2016 were evangelicals, and pro-life was their issue, 2/3. And that's why Ted Cruz won. So you don't discount them this time around. What's interesting, though, a lot of them still like Trump. So Trump gets out there and he's got his foot in and out of this, what to do now. Because the pro-life faction is like, okay, we got Roe. Now what? A lot of them are like, let's keep going until we ban it in every state or on the federal level, take it up in Congress. Trump's like being very careful with that. Yet he keeps command of these voters, because he can say, I gave you the Supreme Court. I gave you Roe v. Wade. They're happy with that. And they seem to be satisfied, even though not all of them. They're like there's religious leaders in Iowa who can't stand Trump, and it's because of this issue. But the voters themselves seem happy with the fact that he gave them this ruling, that this long sought goal of overturning Roe. He delivered it. And for that, he seems to have earned their forever loyalty. So I used to think DeSantis, Tim Scott, others would crack that base because they are to the right of Trump on abortion currently. I haven't seen that yet. And I'm curious to see how this pans out. Having listened to the candidates last night talk about it again.
And to the other side of that, Susan, it's been an animating issue for Democrats. And I think some Republican pollsters or strategists maybe have yet to grasp how much of an animating issue, because we saw what happened in Kansas. We saw what happened in Wisconsin with those special elections there that have happened. And for Nikki Haley to stake out the position, I think she's kind of like maybe the canary in the coal mine. Like, listen, we're going to lose on this issue if it's as absolute as some people on this stage want it to be.
And that's the swing state issue here. So we're getting to the general election. So move ourselves over to the next step here, the general election. Abortion will sink the Republicans, I'm fully convinced, in these key swing states. But it may not if the candidate is moderate on the issue.
Yeah.
Now, Trump is the guy that can do that, even though he has other flaws that may cost us the swing states for the Republicans. But he moderates himself on an abortion in a way that he is a little bit of a shape shifter, but he pulls it off. DeSantis would probably not be able to pull it off because he will bring out the masses. He will bring out the Democrats on that issue full force. And so would anyone else who supports the 6-week ban or supports, just eliminating abortion. If you are going to survive the general election as a Republican, I contend you have to be more of a moderate. If you go full bore 6 weeks or earlier and you really push that out, and if you don't push it out in the forefront of your campaign, the Democrats will. So it doesn't matter. You can't hide from your position.
Well, in the test cases so far have Showed us that it's a loser for Republicans. You know, you had the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race where you had a judge who was basically saying, I'm pro-life, and, you know, basically signaling to voters that she's not going to touch those issues if cases come before her, or at least show some lenience in that direction. And Kansas, another.
Yeah, you can't win. I'm telling you, Kansas, all it was the big test. The big thing is Wisconsin, of course. Everyone thinks you got to win Wisconsin if you're going to win this election. It's hard to put the puzzle together any other way. They're like the best case scenario right now. I don't think you can win Wisconsin in a 6-week ban in your policy book there. I don't think you can. You will get the vote. The women will come out. Their people will come out in force there to stop it. And I'm not sure how Republicans can overcome that. It's a loser. I always say this. The issue of life is not a loser. It's a big, important win for the pro-life groups. Politically speaking, total loser for the Republican Party.
Seth, to the point, I want to add that Mike Pence, 15-week federal ban, and Nikki Haley, rightfully so, says you don't have the votes to do it. And it reminded me of when Republicans repealed, the House repealed the ACA, Obamacare, 40 plus times as a symbolic measure, and never went anywhere. Then they've got all the levers of power, and they still didn't have the votes to repeal it. So,
how often have we seen politics run into reality? So when you cover politics, you learn that it's slightly tethered to reality, and the people making the arguments still have to win those arguments based on stuff that's slightly tethered to reality. So it makes things quite complicated. I do think, with Susan's point on the abortion stuff, it was interesting that Nikki Haley, she basically went with the electability stuff, right? Like, it was the abortion thing, and she also said Trump can't win a general election. Not something that a ton of people are going to, lay their hat on in a primary debate. But this is an overarching, looming thing about the whole primary in particular. Whether candidates on different issues are going to run too far to the right, or whether or not, if Republicans nominate Trump again, that they're toast, because he's such a disliked person outside of that 30-40% of the Republican Party.
And the problem is the 30-40% say if it's not him, they're not
right.
They're like, it's got to be him or else. It's really interesting how wedded they are to Trump, and it's kudos to Trump for being able to have a loyal base like that. Politically, it's like a dream come true, right? You have the space that you simply can't shed. It sticks with you through thick and thin. The problem is it's not a big enough base, and that's you're just stuck with sort of almost a third party. There's the Trump party, then you have the Republican Party, and then you have the Democrats.
That's totally right.
And it's truly where they are right now. And look, realistically, with these numbers, it's possible, but it's not probable that one of these other candidates is going to win, even though there's any number of factors that could change that outcome, because it's only August and we're several months away from the January 15th Iowa caucuses, and then New Hampshire, South Carolina, and then Nevada. All these things, anything could happen Super Tuesday. But say things remain the way they are now, and there just isn't a lot of change in the polls, you're looking at this thing being wrapped up in March. So it'll be over. And then you'll have Trump there. Here we go. We'll have our general election. It's just going to be, to me, I don't see this as a complete repeat of 2020 if it's Trump versus Biden. I feel like the electorate is a little different now. They're more jaded on the Republican side. And I think Biden's performance has been so unsteady that I don't think it's going to be a 2020 rematch. It's going to be something different. It's going to be, having a lot to do with, I think, kind of a real just polarization in America, and how all that, who shows up, out of this polarized situation, who decides to show up? Are Democrats so unmotivated by Biden that they stay home? Are Trump voters the only people who show up, and then the rest of the Republican Party is like, I can't vote for that guy again. I think we're in for some surprises just in terms of how the two of these people face off. They're both flawed candidates for sure. And I think that's going to make it it's going to make it a much different general election than it was in 2020. Never mind the fact that Trump has 4 criminal cases happening while he's going to be campaigning for president. Never mind that fact. So this is going to be an election that's incomparable, I think, to the past, even the past several elections that we've seen.
I agree with that. But I will say the real weird thing about this one, if it is a rematch, is that typically elections are a referendum on the sitting president, but this will be a referendum on 2 presidents, right?
That's right.
And because if Trump's in the race, it's a referendum on Trump still. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But no other candidate on the Republican side is going to face that sort of thing. Not even close.
Correct.
But at the same time, yeah, it's going to be a referendum on Biden for the first time. And I agree with Susan. Every election cycle is so different. You know, we try to map it out based on past elections, but things get crazy, things change. And, you know, it's really hard to pin down. And that's why, you know, doing these post-debate wrap-ups, trying to figure out the long-term effect it's very difficult.
It is difficult. I mean, I always say what's possible and what's probable, and there's so many possibilities right now, which makes it really exciting. Okay, between now and then, anything could happen. Anything at all could happen. There's some people who are convinced Joe Biden will drop out, and there are many people who say that and believe all kinds of theories. You just have no idea, you know, what events may take place to influence what ultimately happens next, you know, in 2024. But I feel like watching these debates at least gives us a good opportunity to see everybody out there next to each other talk. They did get a chance to talk about the issues. Yes, they fought with each other, but it gave Americans that first shot at seeing everybody on the stage. A lot of people already know who Trump is and what he stands for, but here these other candidates were, these other 8 viable candidates, talking about what it would be like in the post-Trump universe. And to me, that was what was really interesting about the debate last night is the other world. That, you know, we've been in Trump world now since let's see, 2015, right? When did he first come down the escalator stairs? 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's been a long time. And so last night was sort of like, you know, opening the curtain on, you know, the world. There may be a world post-Trump, or, you know.
That's why some of those debates were so interesting, like particularly with the Ukraine stuff, because you have people within the party trying to wrestle the message away from Trump, right? Like we obviously saw people trying to mimic Trump and style, you know, Vivek is the best example, and on different policy points. But so Trump wasn't there, so there were people that tried to mimic Trump, and then there were also people trying to wrestle the framework away from Trump, you know, to make it more viable for them.
Right, without alienating his base, which is almost impossible.
You're starting to see the old GOP, new GOP, Trump, non-Trump, whatever schism you want to call it in some of the answers. Mike Pence, Chris Christie, very traditional in the way they presented themselves. Nikki Haley, I thought her messaging was a little more modern for what younger Republicans. And there was a question from a young Republican about climate change, and most of them kind of ducked the issue a little bit, except for Ramaswamy was against it, saying it was a hoax, obviously. Yeah. But like there's an opportunity for some newer, younger based policy positions that if the Republican Party is going to win over Gen Z and millennials and whoever else is coming up in the electorate, that those are going to have to tack a little bit more to maybe some moderation in there as opposed to just flat out party bases.
You know, we would be remiss to point out perhaps the biggest winner of the night is the guy that made the Richmond, North of Richmond song. What's his name? Oliver Anthony.
Yeah, and they used the lyrics to his song. They played it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yet, like, and that's, you know, just as it's go back to James Carville, it's the economy, stupid. It was the top of the show, and they tried to focus on it, and a lot of people blamed spending, which rightfully so. Nikki Haley criticized spending during the Trump administration, which is something that doesn't probably get a lot of airplay on the Republican side of the field there. But I thought they were light on like what they would, for example, the Fed is in Wyoming right now, mulling over whether to hike rates again. And granted, maybe that's not the nitty gritty policy you want to get into in such a first Republican debate. But in terms of actual answers about, prices are still high. Whether it's gas, whether it's certain food items, some things have come down, but inflation is still a very prominent problem, Susan, whether or not people on Wall Street, which, stocks are higher than ever, companies are seeing record earnings in certain places, but yet the regular costs that Americans are feeling for durable goods and other types of goods, whether it's cars, washing machines, appliances, food, gas, all of that type of stuff that we see a dollar sign next to in our daily lives is still there. And yet the economy hums on at this record rate. I still think there's a disconnect there that the candidates can hone in on and perhaps hone their message to. There's
a lot of room there for them to do that. And I feel like I hear the candidates doing it somewhat, saying, do you understand it? And I heard it last night too, and I think DeSantis drove this home, and other candidates did as well, that the rampant spending is the reason for inflation. Inflation is the reason for the interest rate hikes. The interest rate hikes are the reason you can't buy a house, and that your credit card payments are now the point where you're drowning. This stuff is killing people. I heard the Fox News went around and was interviewing ahead of the debate and aired some of the footage talking to people in Wisconsin. And this one gentleman said in his neighborhood, he said, inflation is killing us. I think that's such an important issue, because people traditionally have voted, with their pocketbooks or wallets. They go to the polls, and if things are good for them, then they start thinking about other issues. But if it's not, it's the economy, stupid. And generally it is what it is, because that affects everybody directly. It's been a slow frog boiling over the past few years. I wonder if people are just used to this now. Like, oh yeah, I'm used to $5 loaf of bread. I'm used to $4 a gallon. I think the interest rates is a now new and sudden thing that's crushing people. You're talking, if you look at these rates on mortgages,
yeah.
Or say you have credit card debt, say you're trying to buy a car, you're increasing the price. Especially young people who have a lot of this credit card debt because they can't even get by on their paychecks. You're killing them. Okay. And this is terrible. This is like, so Biden gets out there and talks about how he's helping everybody with all this spending. You're taking it back and then some, a lot more, with the high interest rates that people are now paying because of the inflation caused by rampant spending. Now, Republicans were in on this too at the beginning of COVID. They were in on a lot of that spending, but they did hit the brakes, and Democrats did not want to hit the brakes and kept going with it. So they piled on. In fact, they wanted a lot more than they eventually signed into law. So, the lesson of the rampant spending, I think they talked about that last night pretty clearly, but there were so many other topics on the table that didn't get a lot of, what was the solution? Stop the spending. Well, you're going to claw back that spending, and then also open up, and they actually have clawed back some of that. And that's probably, they're still spending more. The student loan forgiveness stuff is more government spending there. And then now you've got, the gas prices. So the Republicans last night talked about increasing American energy production, which will lower gas prices eventually. Things like that will lower your, stop the regulations that are going to raise your energy prices and raise costs for you to buy a washing machine or do anything. Those are real solutions. And I do hear them talking about that. But I think the public doesn't understand what inflation is and what causes it. And I think that's a lesson for the candidates to really try to explain to people, how we got where we are right now, that it's from government spending.
And it's also a huge point of delineation for primary purposes, right? Like Trump's hands are in on this, And,
yeah, that's right. He spent that money for COVID and
you get that, you get the COVID shutdown stuff, just unpopular stuff with the base. So, again, getting back to the looming thing of, I think it was Bill Maher who said, why would I go see a Rolling Stone cover band if I go down the street and see the Rolling Stones? And so it's the same thing with Trump. You got to find these areas of delineation to show to voters you're a better choice and you're going to make their lives better. And so spending could be one of those soft spots for him.
That will put a nice bow on this recap of the first Republican presidential primary debate. We, of course, will be back with you down the line as these debates continue here into the fall and, of course, into 2024. For Susan and Seth, I'm George. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.